Hello Mila, hello Jack. Hello everybody else who's watching, and welcome to Storytime with Grandad. Today's book is from the Lighthouse Keeper, and it is The Lighthouse Keeper's Breakfast. Mr. and Mrs. Grinling lived with their cat Hamish in a little white cottage perched high on the cliffs. Mr. Grinling was a lighthouse keeper. By day and night, with his assistant Sam, he lovingly tended the light. One Wednesday morning, when Sam was polishing, he noticed a tiny inscription right at the top of the lighthouse. "Well, well," he said to himself, "just fancy that. Our lighthouse is 200 years old this year," he told everyone. "We should celebrate," said Mrs. Grinling. "Maybe some presents," said Mr. Grinling. "A fresh coat of red and white paint." "And a party," said Mrs. Grinling. "How about fancy dress?" suggested Sally de Croissant, the baker. "Something to do with the sea," said Jason, the postman. "I've got a lovely octopus suit." "We can use my old sailing ship," roared Admiral Fleetabix. "I'll moor her out in the bay." "Can it be an all-night party with a birthday breakfast?" asked the children. "It is an extremely important occasion." And everyone agreed that Mr. and Mrs. Grinling should be the very special guests. It was so difficult to choose the best fancy dress. "Shall I wear the shark suit?" asked Mr. Grinling. "Could I be a mermaid?" wondered Mrs. Grinling. But when they discovered the pirate costumes, their minds were made up. "All my life I've yearned to be a pirate," sighed Mrs. Grinling. "To spit and swear and roam the seven seas." "And search for treasure on a treasure island," added Mr. Grinling. "We'll be splendid pirates," cried Mrs. Grinling, as she swashed and buckled around the room. "Hattie and Herbert, the scourge of the seven seas." "Ooh-ah!" said Mr. Grinling, and he swashed and buckled too. "Perhaps Hamish can be our pirate cat," suggested Mrs. Grinling. But Hamish had very different ideas. Whenever Mrs. Grinling wanted him to try his pirate costume, Hamish disappeared. "Drat that cat!" she exclaimed. "Where does he go these days?" The Grinlings practised being pirates at every opportunity. "Here's your toast, me old one-eyed beauty." "Ooh-ah!" "Avars me hearties, let's stir the crow's nest soup." But Mr. Grinling's cutlass caused all sorts of difficulties. "Shiver me timbers, careful, Captain." Mrs. Grinling quite frightened Sam and the seagulls with her cursing and swearing. Gracious me! Hattie Grinling, I don't believe I'm hearing such things. I'm off to the village. "Arr! Thank goodness, only a week to go to the sea party. The Grinlings are driving me mad with their pirate antics." "Oh, they're dressed up as pirates, are they?" On the night of the party, the Grinlings rowed out towards the party ship. At first its lights shone clearly across the water, but gradually they dimmed, and soon they vanished altogether. "What can have happened, Mrs. G?" said Mr. Grinling. "We can't be lost." The waves slapped against the little boat. It was darker than Mr. Grinling had ever seen it. And then, as the lighthouse flashed across the bay, "Look, Mr. G!" exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Someone to rescue us!" A speedboat swished in beside them and nearly swamped the little dinghy. 3 pirates leapt across the bow and thrust their shining cutlasses in the air. "Ooh-ah!" they roared, and they rampaged around the dinghy. Mrs. Grinling was delighted. "Real pirates!" she whispered to Mr. Grinling, and she forgot all about the sea party. "Ooh-ah!" growled the fiercest pirate. "We be pirates, and this be our pirate patch. We're on the lookout for likely new recruits." "Oh, yes," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "We'd love to be pirates. Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Mr. Grinling waved his cutlass rather feebly. The pirates appeared rather surprised. Of course, you have to show us that you can be pirates, snarled the smallest and smelliest pirate. You have to pass the incredibly difficult pirate tests. Mr. Grinling wasn't sure about pirate tests. Okay, kids, shouted the fiercest pirate. We'll blindfold them and gag 'em, and take 'em back to the captain. She'll soon find out if they're made of the proper pirate material. You know what she's like. The pirate captain was a particularly nasty-looking piece of work. She had black teeth and smelt of rotten fish and seaweed. A grubby white parrot clung to her shoulder. Right, me hearties, what have we here? She peg-legged around the Gringlings. So, you want to join our pirate crew? Oh, yes, please, said Mrs. Grinling. Definitely, agreed Mr. Grinling. Well, you look like pirates and you smell like pirates, but you have to pass the 6 pirate tests before you can be pirates. Are you ready? Asked the captain. So, what comes first, me hearties? The swearing test, shouted the pirates. Mrs. Grinling swore loud and long. The parrot covered his ears. Mr. Grinling thought for a while. Blithering bumbollods, he muttered at last. The pirates shook their heads. Now, the sleeping in a hammock in a force 9 gale test. Rock that ship, me bully boys and girls. Mrs. Grinling held tightly onto the hammock sides and smiled happily. Mr. Grinling bounced right out of his hammock and was seasick several times. The pirates groaned. The Jolly Roger flag test, shouted Captain Buzzybell. Just a quick climb to the crow's nest. Mrs. Grinling scampered up the rope ladder. At the top, she not only hoisted the flag, but waved her cutlass. Shiver me timbers, shouted the pirates. Mr. Grinling closed his eyes as he started to climb. Don't look down, he muttered to himself. Think of Hamish and Sam. Think of nice things to eat. Peach surprise and iced sea biscuits. Think of... He fell into a barrel of foul-smelling water. I'm so sorry, said the captain. They're very polite for pirates, spluttered Mr. Grinling to Mrs. Grinling. Pirate test number 4, announced Captain Buzzybell. Finding the treasure, roared all the pirates. Here's the map, said Captain Buzzybell. There's lovely treasure hidden on our ship. You've got 10 minutes to find it. Ooh-ah! Shouted the Grinlings, and off they raced. They found the treasure chest under the bottom of a very small pirate. Open sesame! Shouted the pirates. The chest was big enough for only 1 jewel and 2 pieces of 8. We're a little short of treasure at the moment, exclaimed the captain. No decent raids lately. And now the most dangerous, most terrifying, the most dastardly test of them all. Eating pirate food, shouted the pirates. Eating, said Mr. Grinling happily. Now, eating is something I can do. Some of the smaller pirates sniggered. Captain Buzzybell laid out the food. 2 maggots and a weevil wriggled across the biscuit. Mrs. Grinling turned quite green, but Mr. Grinling ate it, weevils, maggots, and all. Hurrah! Shouted the pirates. And now for number 6, the final test. If you pass this, you can join our pirate gang. Tell 'em, me bouncing buccaneers. Walk in the plank, cried the pirates. Oh, said Mrs. Grinling. Dearie me, said Mr. Grinling. The water below looked smoothly dark and menacing. Mr. Grinling wished he was wearing the shark costume. Do you think I could ask for armbands? He whispered. Mrs. Grinling looked at the pirates' faces and shook her head. We've always wanted to be pirates, Mr. G, she said. We aren't afraid of a little bit of water, are we? Goodness no, said Mr. Grinling, but his knees knocked and his tummy felt all wobbly like a jelly. Ready, he said, and he held his nose. Steady, said Mrs. Grinling, and she closed her eyes. Just a minute, said Mr. Grinling, letting go of his nose. Something's amiss here. Who ever heard of new pirates walking the plank? We could drown before we've even done any pirating. Suddenly the pirates pulled off their disguises. Surprise, surprise, they shouted. The Grinlings were so astounded that they nearly fell in the water. Jason the postman, exclaimed Mr. Grinling. Admiral Fleetabix, cried Mrs. Grinling. And Sally de Croissant, they said, both together. We heard how you longed to be pirates, she explained, so we planned a pirate experience. We had to be nasty so you would think we were real. We certainly did, said Mr. Grinling, as he mopped his brow. The lighthouse beamed its last light across the bay. It's party time, called Jason the postman. He picked up his fiddle and started to play. May I have the pleasure, Pirate Herbert? Asked Mrs. Grinling. "War, Pirate Hattie," smiled Mr. Grinling, and they danced until they could dance no more. "Sun's up," called Sally de la Croissant. "Time for the birthday breakfast." Mrs. Grinling looked worried. "We can't have the party without Hamish or Sam," said Mr. Grinling. They're coming, shouted the children. "Just in time for the food," said Sam as he climbed onto the deck. He placed a large wicker basket at the Grinling's feet and carefully opened the lid. Out jumped Hamish, Mrs. Hamish, and 4 little Hamishes. "Now that's what I call real treasure," smiled Mrs. Grinling. The end. Goodbye, Mila. Goodbye, Jack. I'll see you soon. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.